Morena koutou katoa. No mai haere mai ki tēnei wānanga o te kaupapa, te ratonga tōku whakawhitinga o Oranga Tamariki. Just Sayin 2021 was the second round of the Just Sayin survey. In 2020, we did 2 surveys, one of 16-year-olds and then another general one. But this one was for anyone aged 16 to 20 who was eligible for transition worker support. We managed to get in contact with 355 young people. 331 were included in the analyses, and the other 24 were included in a separate youth justice report, which is now up on Oranga Tamariki's website. So if you want to see that, I'm sure the link will be shared after this. In terms of the sample, young women were overrepresented in the sample, and we heard from Rangatahi Māori, Pacific young people, and then other ethnic groups. There was a bit of crossover with the Māori and Pacific group, as you'd expect. There were 32 young people who were both Māori and Pacific. Yeah, so the in-care group, we've got 129 young people who were still in care and 202 who had left care. Preparing for transitions, around 2/3 of young people responded positively to questions about their social worker. So that includes the questions, does your social worker do what they say they would do? Does your social worker, or are they there for you when you need them? And do they provide the type of support you need for when you leave care? And 79% of young people felt they had a say in the important decisions about their life most or all of the time. And so when we look at the in-care versus left care group, and we're thinking about their planning through the FGCs, 49% of young people who are in care had already had a plan worked out for when they left care, and 62% who had left care knew that they had a plan. In terms of who was involved, it was pretty similar outcomes for in-care and left care groups for young people who felt they had a say in the important decisions about their life all or most of the time, or that the important people in their life, such as their whānau, were involved in their planning as much as they would like. Over twice as many Pacific young people had a copy of their plan for leaving care than the rest of the population. Yeah, 25% of Māori, 64% of Pacific, and 73% of other ethnicities. For the whānau involved in their planning, it was 56% of the total population, and Pacific young people felt that the important people in their life were involved most out of the Pacific, Māori, or other groups. Here's just some quotes about young people who felt that Oranga Tamariki made things better for them or not at all. Some people spoke about a supportive social worker. Others felt that they were safe with Oranga Tamariki, and others mentioned that their social worker was kind of elusive, or that they had social workers changing often and it was hard to have that ongoing support. In terms of transition worker support, young people were really positive about transition workers. Most young people said their transition worker understood the kind of support they need, were there when they need them, and did what they said they would do most or all of the time. So that's the same questions that we asked about the social workers earlier on. And 71% of all young people gave positive answers to all 3 of those questions. So of the young people that we spoke to, 85% had been asked if they wanted a transition worker, and 63% of young people who had a transition worker thought that the frequency of contact was about right. So we also asked them how often they interacted with their transition worker. We had options like a week, once a year, every few months, but there wasn't a correlation between those who felt that the frequency was right and what the frequency was. Yeah, so all groups rated their transition worker highly. Most highest was the Pacific group, and then Māori, and then other ethnicities. And then on the right there, 23% of Rangatahi Māori were supported by a Māori organisation, and 24% of Pacific young people were supported by a Pacific organisation. 38% for both Māori and Pacific groups were supported by a transition worker who was also Māori or Pacific. And then we asked young people, what difference does it make having a Māori transition support worker for those who did? And a lot of it was just around understanding the tikanga, pūrākau, the histories and the kōrero, and just a significantly better cultural understanding. Pacific views of having a Pacific transition worker. Pacific young people they didn't feel as strongly that they needed a Pacific transition worker, but I That might have to do with the fact that, in fact, most of them were Māori and Pacific. So, like that first quote there, I'm two cultures, it doesn't matter who they are as long as they help me out. But others felt that having a Pacific transition worker would be super helpful and make a real difference to their lives. Living arrangements. 38% of young people in care thought they would be living in the same place as they were when they left care. And 28% of young people actually were living in the same place as before they left care. Most young people, 87%, selected only one place that they were living, and the most common place that young people lived was in a family home, and most commonly with their whakapapa whānau. 9% of young people were living in unstable housing, which included a garage, couch surfing, motels, cars, vans, or sleeping rough. So that was about 30 young people. We do have a fact sheet that is now up on Oranga Tamariki's website of just a few findings. With that small number of 30 young people, we couldn't do too much analysis, but yeah, there's a little bit up there on the website. And a higher proportion of Rangatahi Māori lived with whakapapa whānau than other ethnic groups. Parenting. We asked young people whether they were hapu or pregnant, and 17% of young people were either a parent already or were hapu. And of that group, 63% lived with their child either some or all of the time. And of those that did live with their children some or all of the time, 59% said that they had lots of support for looking after their child. 47% rating that they had 10 out of 10 support. Ooh, identity. So 72% of young people felt secure in their identity, proud of who they were, and hopeful about their future. And 58% were positive about all three. Pacific young people were more secure in their identity, proud of who they were, and hopeful about their future than the rest of the population by about 10%, but all groups rated highly on the scale of very good to excellent. And when we asked young people, where do you see yourself in the next 5 years? 62% of young people had goals that related to jobs. And we have a slide a bit further on that talks about the skills that they want to learn to help with their future. Wellbeing. So Pacific young people rated their lives slightly higher than the rest of the population. Other ethnicities with the lowest at 37%, rating very good to excellent. So that's that other ethnicities group, which includes NZ European and any other group that isn't Pacific or Māori. But 31% rated their lives as fair or poor. And with the mental health, the most problematic one for young people. And those who rated their lives poorly did so regardless of whether they had a transition worker or not. There wasn't a correlation in that side. So we asked young people if they're worried about anything in their life at the moment, and we also asked rangatahi who were still in care how worried they were about leaving care. And most young people were doing well, but around 1/4 were struggling with some aspects of their lives, including those ones on the previous slide, being secure in their identity, proud of who they were, hopeful about their future, knowing their iwi, general life ratings, and ratings on Te Pare Tapawha. Pacific young people were more worried about what would happen when they left care than the rest of the population, following by Māori and then the other ethnicities group. With Pacific young people, 30% had moderate to serious worries. So yeah, approximately 1/4 were worried about something in their lives, and that bottom right chart, if you look at that one is if you're worried about anything in your life right now and how they feel about their lives. So this is pretty strong correlation there. If they're not feeling great about their lives, they're probably seriously worried about something. And we asked young people what they were worried about in their life. A lot of it was regarding, uncertainty for their future, about their mental well-being, finances, and, who's going to look after them if their whānau's not there. And when we looked at this by groups, for example, if we looked at the disability group, as you'd expect, they were kind of worried about who was going to look after them and their mental health or their physical well-being. If we looked at the unstable housing group, they were worried about becoming homeless and financial stability. And rainbow young people had similar kind of outcomes. So we asked about disability. If we look at the disability group, 59% of young people reported difficulties with learning or their emotional or mental health. So looking at the overall disability group, 14% had just a physical disability, 58% had only a psychological disability, and 28% of the disability population had both a physical and psychological disability. The most common disabilities were learning, remembering, and concentrating, and emotional, psychological, or mental health conditions. Fewer young people with a disability were positive about their life, with 59% of young people with a disability reported good or better about their life, and compared to the non-disability group, which was 83% positive. Young people with a disability rated aspects of their life more negatively than other people, especially about their social worker, actually. So 46% rated positively compared to 66% of the non-disability population. So we asked young people if there's been a time in the last 12 months where they needed to access a doctor or nurse and weren't able to. 34% of the overall population needed to see a doctor or nurse and wasn't able to see one in the last year. And so we asked what the barriers were to accessing healthcare. And that was mostly transportation, cost, and anxiety. A lot of people were a bit isolated and didn't know how they would get to the doctor in the first place. Others saw the fees as a barrier. Here's the quote: opening up to my parents is a big fear of mine, and I didn't and still don't know how to ask or say that I need help to need a checkup because of my past. I feel still scared deep inside. So a lot of young people were struggling with, for example, depression, anxiety, same as that bottom right one, or even just coming to the point of being able to ask if they can go and access healthcare, despite knowing that they needed to. And so we asked about support. 69% of young people said that they would turn to an adult if they needed help during a difficult time. A high proportion of young people would talk to their transition worker about their worries compared to their social worker. Yeah, 78% of the overall population said they could talk to their transition worker about their worries, which is really promising. And kind of in contrast to the social worker, 53% said that they could talk to their social worker about their worries. 40% of young people said they were being supported by organisations outside of their transition provider and Oranga Tamariki, and 69% of young people knew how to contact Oranga Tamariki if they needed help, while 48% knew how to contact Voice Whakarongo Mai. Yeah, 77% had an adult they could turn to for help, 68% of Māori had an adult they could turn to for help, and 66% of the other population. So a lot of people, when we asked who they would talk to, a lot said their friends, and other mostly included their transition workers, their social workers, or someone else who was kind of in their care circle. So we asked young people what skills they wanted to learn to help with their future. Most commonly, young people wanted to get their driver's license, and secondly, young people wanted to learn money management skills. If we look at that chart on the right, so that's looking at those who are getting support to learn the skills and those who aren't getting support. So of those who aren't getting support, they most want to learn money management skills. And of the other group, we've got a few on the right there. People said communication skills. They wanted to learn first aid course or specific sort of trades and things like that. Education and training. So 50% of the cohort was in educational training. If you look at that chart at the top right, you can see that the population of who we surveyed, it's kind of a bit younger for those who are not in educational training. 47% of those who were not in educational training had NCEA level 2. If you look at that chart at the bottom, so that's comparing their school achievement versus the national statistics for school leavers. So it's 81% for school leavers and 47% for those who are not in educational training. If we look at the NEET rate for Just Sayin young people is higher than the national rate, 19% compared to 12.2% age 15 to 24. 32% of Pacific young people fell into the NEET group and 25% of Māori, although for the Pacific young people's group it was quite a small N value, so kind of take that with a grain of salt. So if we're looking at challenges for young people, the largest sample size in the 2021 survey provides more information about the transition needs of young people with different characteristics and context amongst those leaving care. But next round, so the Just Sayin 3, we're hoping to get in contact with even more young people. So hopefully things like that Pacific end value will be a bit bigger, and we'll be able to make a few more analyses of things like that and things like the unstable housing group. So if we look at the transition support service, there's a close relationship between young people and their transition workers. They feel like they can kind of talk to their transition worker about their worries. So it's pretty positive overall. The contact frequency, kind of cracking that code, what's the perfect frequency for young people to be in contact with their transition worker? And there was quite a lot of variance across how often young people were in contact with their transition worker. And we also thought that we could provide more support to develop the skills that young people thought they needed, such as helping with the driver's license, money management, and those other pieces that they wanted to learn. For young people with disabilities, smaller proportions of young people with disability were positive about all aspects of the survey questions. So providing support for those young people with disabilities, which was actually highly made up of rainbow young people and young people's voices. Many young people felt their voices were not heard and asked for Oranga Tamariki to listen to them. So we had a open text box at the end of the survey asking what's one thing that could help with your support that you need, and probably the most frequently answered was just for people to listen to them. For Rangatahi Māori, many Rangatahi Māori valued support by a transition worker, but only 43% said they had a choice about the organisation that would support them. So just looking at creating a better support system for Rangatahi Māori and being able to help connect them with maybe a Māori organisation or Māori transition worker if they want. And Pacific young people who were receiving transition worker support had statistically similar outcomes to non-Pacific. And that's the end of my slides. Ngā mihi nui.